Have you ever noticed that no matter how much you achieve, it's never enough? You want something, you struggle, you suffer, you finally get it. And for a few moments, maybe minutes, maybe days, you feel a strange relief, almost as if you've reached some kind of peace. But then, something happens. A subtle emptiness begins to appear, and before you realize it, you're already wanting again. More money, more recognition, more pleasure, more control, more someone. What if I told you this isn't a flaw in you, but the exact way your mind is designed to work? And worse, what if the real problem isn't what you desire, but the very act of desiring itself? This is the cruel truth that Arthur Schopenhauer tried to reveal to the world. A truth that, if deeply understood, can completely change how you see your life and yourself. But it's also a truth most people avoid, because facing it means letting go of some of the most comforting illusions that sustain human existence. And now comes the question you probably don't want to hear. What if everything you call a dream is just a sophisticated mechanism of suffering? Silence. Because deep down, something inside you already suspects this. Schopenhauer believed that the essence of life is not happiness, nor purpose, nor fulfillment. He argued that the foundation of everything is something far more primitive, more invisible, and far more dangerous. The will. Not will in the conscious, rational sense, like when you decide to do something, but a blind, irrational, relentless force, an impulse that lives inside you and never stops. This will does not care about your well-being. It doesn't care about your happiness. It wants only one thing: to keep desiring. And this is where the trap begins. Because you believe you desire specific things, a relationship, a car, a better life. But in reality, you are being driven by something much deeper, something that uses these goals merely as excuses to stay active. You don't desire the object, you desire the state of desiring. And that changes everything. Think about it carefully. When you finally get what you wanted so badly, what happens? The intensity fades, the charm disappears, the mind starts looking for something else. This isn't coincidence, it's structure. And this is exactly where Schopenhauer's view becomes disturbing. Because if the will is only satisfied temporarily and soon returns to wanting, then life becomes a cycle of continuous lack. You suffer because you don't have. Then you suffer because you do. But it's no longer enough. And then you suffer because you need again. This cycle isn't accidental, it's inevitable. Now hold that thought for a moment, because it connects to something even deeper, something Friedrich Nietzsche perceived but interpreted differently. Nietzsche didn't deny this impulse. On the contrary, he believed desire, the will, was a fundamental force of life, something that could be transformed into power. But there's a crucial detail here. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power. Schopenhauer spoke of the will to live. A drive for expansion versus an invisible prison. And you are right in the middle of it, every single day, without realizing it. When you open a social media app and start scrolling endlessly, it's not just entertainment, it's desire in action. Small doses of stimulation that keep your mind trapped in the cycle. You're not seeking content, you're seeking sensation. And every like, every video, every notification is a micro-reward feeding that internal machine. Modern neuroscience has a name for this: the dopaminergic system. But Schopenhauer was already describing this long before science could measure it. Dopamine is not tied to happiness. It's tied to anticipation, to wanting, to almost having. And this explains something unsettling. The pleasure is more in the pursuit than in the arrival. Because when you arrive, the game ends. And the mind hates the end of the game. So it creates another. Do you see the cruelty in this? You spend your life chasing something that, by definition, can never fully satisfy you. And the more you believe the next achievement will be the one that fixes everything, the deeper you sink into the cycle. Now let me push you a bit further. What if many of your choices aren't really yours? What if much of what you desire has been planted in you? Society, culture, algorithms, social influence. All of these shape what you believe you want. But the will, this primitive force, uses these influences as fuel. It adapts. It finds new ways to manifest. In the past, it was basic survival. Today, it's social validation. Before, it was food. Now, it's status. But the mechanism is the same. And this brings us to an even more uncomfortable point. If your mind is constantly projecting desires, then you are rarely present. You're always in the future, always chasing the next moment, always believing that when that happens, you'll finally feel complete. But that moment never comes. Never. And here comes a perspective that echoes since Socrates. True knowledge begins when you realize how much you're being deceived by yourself. Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what he perhaps didn't say explicitly is how uncomfortable that examination can be. Because when you start observing your own desires honestly, something strange happens. They begin to lose strength. You notice patterns, repetitions, impulses that arise without a clear reason. And gradually, you begin to see the will operating, not as you, but as something within you. And that is a breaking point. Because if you are not your desires, then who are you? This question is not simple. And that's exactly why most people never get here. They keep running, working, seeking, filling the void with more stimulation. Because to stop, to observe, to question, is to face a silence that feels unsettling. And that silence reveals something few are prepared to accept. Maybe there is no final satisfaction. Maybe the idea of being completely happy is a construct, a narrative, a promise that keeps you moving. And if that's true, then the entire structure of modern life starts to look different. Relationships, career, consumption. Everything can be reinterpreted as manifestations of the will. Now, be careful. This doesn't mean nothing matters, but it does mean that the meaning you assign may be influenced by something you don't fully control. And this is where Carl Jung adds an even deeper layer. Jung spoke about the unconscious, a part of the mind that guides behaviors, desires, and decisions without you realizing it. He said that what you do not make conscious ends up controlling your life. And you call that fate. Now connect this with Schopenhauer. The will is unconscious. Desires arise without your choosing them. and you spend your life reacting to them, believing you are in control. Is that freedom? Or is it a sophisticated form of prison? Hold that question, because the answer is not comfortable. And we're not even at the most intense point yet. There is a direct consequence of all this that few people notice. If desire is never fully satisfied, then it requires increasing intensity. You need more stimulation, more novelty, more impact. And this explains why things that once were enough now feel dull, why boredom increases, why anxiety grows, why emptiness becomes more frequent. The mind adapts and demands more, always more. This creates a dangerous effect. You start confusing intensity with meaning. You believe something is only worthwhile if it is strong, exciting, unforgettable. But in reality, that may just be the will asking for higher doses. And the more you feed it, the less sensitive you become, less present, less satisfied. Now think about social media again. Faster content, more extreme, more attention-grabbing. This isn't natural evolution. It's adaptation to desire, and you are inside it every day, without realizing how much it shapes your perception of reality. But something even deeper is happening. And this is where most people prefer to look away. If desire is constant and satisfaction is temporary, then the emotional baseline of life tends towards suffering. Not dramatic, obvious suffering, but a constant discomfort, a restlessness, a feeling that something is missing, even when, rationally, everything is fine. And this is exactly what Schopenhauer called the human condition. You don't suffer only when things go wrong. You suffer because the structure of your mind creates lack, creates movement, creates seeking, and it never ends. Now, take a breath for a second, because what comes next is where everything starts to become truly unsettling. If this structure is real, if desire is truly this relentless mechanism, then there is a disturbing possibility. What if the way you live today is reinforcing exactly what keeps you trapped? What if, without realizing it, you are feeding the very system that prevents you from finding peace? And worse, what if the solution isn't getting more, but desiring less? But how do you reduce something that seems to arise on its own? How do you free yourself from an impulse that is part of your own mind? And here is where most people fail, because they try to fight desire, suppress it, ignore it, but that only strengthens the cycle. So what's the way out? Is there a way out? Or are we condemned to live in this invisible loop? The answer begins to emerge, but it requires you to see something you may have never considered before, something that completely changes the game. And this is exactly where the story turns. But before we get there, you need to be willing to let go of one of the deepest beliefs you've been carrying your entire life. The belief that happiness lies in the next fulfilled desire. Because if you don't let that go, nothing that comes next will make sense. And the truth is, almost no one is willing to do that. Almost no one wants to give up that hope, even if it is the very cause of their suffering. Do you really want to understand this? Or do you just want to keep believing in the next desire? If you've made it this far, there's a good chance that some part of you has already realized that continuing to run isn't working. And that's dangerous. Not because it's bad, but because from this point on, you can't unsee it anymore. You start noticing the pattern. You begin to see desire arising. You start observing that silent restlessness trying to push you toward the next thing. And for the first time, you have a chance not to obey automatically. But here's the most important and most ignored point of all. Freedom is not about eliminating desire. Freedom is about not being controlled by it. That difference seems subtle, but it changes everything. Because trying to eliminate desire is a trap. The more you try not to want, the more you want. It's the rebound effect of the mind. And this has been observed both in philosophy and modern psychology. Even the Stoics, like Epictetus, already said something brutally simple. You don't control what appears in your mind, but you do control what you do with it. Now connect this with everything you've seen so far. Desire arises. It always will. But your reaction to it, that can be transformed. And this is where the real shift begins. Because until now, you've been living on autopilot. Desire to action, to brief satisfaction, to new desire. Now there is a space, a gap, and inside that gap is the only place where you can act with awareness. But this space doesn't appear on its own. It needs to be developed. And this is where something interesting happens. Something both Eastern philosophy and modern neuroscience agree on. Observation changes how the mind functions. When you observe a thought without immediately reacting, you weaken the automatic pattern. This isn't theory, this is practice. And it's also uncomfortable, because when you start observing, you realize how restless your mind really is, how it jumps from one desire to another, how it's never satisfied. And that can be shocking, a kind of emptiness, a feeling of, now what? And this is exactly where most people give up, because that emptiness feels like a problem. But in reality, it's the beginning of freedom. Arthur Schopenhauer saw life as inevitable suffering. But he also pointed to two paths where the will loses strength, two rare moments where the cycle weakens. The first is aesthetic contemplation. When you lose yourself completely in something, a song, a landscape, a piece of art, and for a few moments, desire falls silent. There's no seeking, no lack, just presence. The second is more radical and much harder. It's the denial of the will. Not in the sense of destroying yourself, but of stopping identification with the impulse, of seeing desire without becoming it. And this is where Carl Jung comes in with something deeper, because the problem was never desire itself. The problem is unconsciousness, acting without awareness, being guided by internal forces as if they were conscious choices. When you begin to see this, something changes. You still desire, but not with the same blind intensity. You still feel impulses, but you don't have to obey all of them. And slowly, your relationship with your own mind transforms. Now, let's bring this into real life. Think about how many decisions you've made in the last few days. Opening your phone for no reason, checking notifications, comparing your life to someone else's, buying something you didn't even need, seeking validation. All of this seems small, but they are micro-responses to desire, and every time you respond without noticing, you reinforce the cycle. Now imagine the opposite. You feel the impulse, but you wait, you observe. You don't react immediately. At first, this creates discomfort, almost like withdrawal. But then, something unexpected happens. The impulse passes, without you acting, without you feeding it. And this reveals something powerful. Desire is not as strong as it seems. It is persistent, but it is not absolute. And when you realize this, you begin to recover something that felt lost: autonomy. But be careful. This path is not glamorous. There are no instant rewards, no external validation. In fact, it goes against everything society reinforces. While the world says, seek more, you begin to question. While everything pushes constant stimulation, you begin to reduce. While everyone is running, you slow down. And that may make you feel out of place. But maybe that's exactly the point, because most people are trapped in the cycle. And following the majority, in this case, means continuing to suffer in the same way. Now, here comes the deepest part of all. Pay close attention. If suffering comes from endless desire, and if freedom comes from not identifying with that desire, then peace is not found in achieving more. It's found in needing less. But this doesn't mean living without ambition, without goals, without action. It means acting, without being emotionally dependent on the outcome. And that is extremely rare, because most people act to fill a void, not out of conscious choice, but out of inner necessity. Now imagine living differently. You still build, still work, still connect, but not because you desperately need it, because you choose to, without attachment, without the illusion that it will complete you. That changes the quality of everything. Relationships stop being neediness and become exchange. Work stops being escape and becomes expression. Achievements stop being solutions and become consequences. And maybe, most importantly, silence stops being scary, because you no longer need to fill it all the time. And here is the climax of everything you've heard so far. Most people spend their entire lives trying to satisfy the will. But true transformation begins when you stop serving it blindly, when you see the game without needing to play it all the time. And this doesn't make you cold or apathetic. It makes you aware. But there's one final detail. A detail that defines whether you truly understood this, or if this was just another interesting piece of content. Because understanding this intellectually is easy. Applying it is not. It's hard to remember in the middle of an impulse. Hard to pause in the middle of anxiety. Hard to let go of the belief that the next desire will fix everything. And that's exactly why so few people truly change. They listen, they agree, they relate, but they keep living the same way. And in the end, the cycle continues. So now, the decision is yours. You can leave this and go back to autopilot. Or you can start observing. Start small, one impulse at a time. one pause at a time, because that's how awareness grows, not through massive revolutions, but through small moments of clarity. And if you made it this far, maybe you're already ready for it. Now tell me something, and answer honestly. What was the last desire you followed without even noticing? Drop it in the comments. I want to read it. If this made you think differently, leave a like. And if you want to keep exploring this kind of deep reflection, the kind that actually changes how you see life, subscribe now to the channel Art of Awareness. Because here, you don't just consume content, you begin to see.